does it dead end up into that valley?
Yep, but yep.
You can't.
There's a one.
Okay. So, long story short, Alex started Amplio nearly within a month or two of me starting Climb. And Climb was my first agency that I sold 4 years later. Lo and behold, unannounced to each other, 4 years and 1 month to the date, Alex goes, "Hey, I just sold Amplio." and we went out and had a beer, and it was great. So we ran very tangential but corresponding paths for 4 years in a really good way. So Climb focused mostly on creative, Amplio focused mostly on media, and so we would refer back and forth across the aisle to each other, and we did that for 3 or 4 years, and then exited. And then kind of midway through my exit, we got the band together, and here we are 2.5 years into those two things actually being under one roof, and it's been good. Cool. I think we're rolling, so we're good. Let's do this thing. While I'm being introspective, and this is a bit of an introspective talk, I wanted to start with this idea of resilience this morning. So my father-in-law caught me in the hall, and I subconsciously don't want my father-in-law's approval, or consciously don't want it. Probably subconsciously need that in some regards. How many of you guys have a father-in-law? How many of you have a great relationship with your father-in-law? All right. How many of you kind of want that little bit of approval, like just that touch, like you married? Yeah. So anyway, we catch each other in the hall, and we got over this big hump with Emmy and all this stuff, which I'll get into. And he goes, "Bo, you're one of the most resilient guys I know." He goes, "You should write a book on what you guys have been through over the last few years." And he used that word resilient, and I've known that word, and I thought it was interesting, but it's not every day someone in the middle of a hallway conversation catches you and says that, and it's not every day someone issues you a compliment like that, and I took it pretty seriously, especially from my father-in-law. Is he a complimentary man? Does he issue compliments that often?
No.
So, and so I got out the Oxford Dictionary and looked it up, and the definition of resilience is to be able to recover from difficulty rapidly. And or quickly. So the ability to recover from those things. And I thought that's an interesting idea. They called me the Weeble Wobble my freshman year at high school. If anyone knows a Weeble Wobble, it's like this weighted thing, this blow up animal thing, and it gets knocked over and it comes back up. It's a kid's story. But I weighed a $108 and was like 5'1" my freshman year and tried to play offensive line. And so I got crushed all the time. And so that idea of getting back up was just kind of ingrained at an early age. But it really started me to get into a place where I was trying to dissect what makes you want to get back up. Why do you want to keep getting back up? And then in the middle of this thing called COVID, I thought, man, I'm talking to my friends, and my friends are struggling with this idea of getting back up and coming through difficulty. And Joe Rogan has this great little moment where he's like, yeah, the challenge with what people are going through right now is they've never really faced difficulty at this level, and so they don't know how to handle that to some extent. And so I'm not going to say it wasn't difficult, but it was less difficult, I think, for Jenna and I. Believe me, it was difficult to go through COVID because we've had difficulty to this moment. So we've had some muscle memory around that. And so, which has led to this very interesting exercise of dissecting resilience. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And then the business applications of that are equally interesting as well. So how many of you guys have survived a pandemic this year? I did. Cool. Awesome. How many of you guys have survived a pandemic with a kid or kids parenting? Okay. How many of you guys have survived a pandemic while owning a business and operating a business? Cool. How many of you guys submitted for a PPP loan? No, I'm just kidding. It's been a process. Everything. We talked about it last night. Just getting food is not exactly as easy as it once was. And so you guys should be proud of that for yourselves and for each other. The next ones I won't make you raise your hands on, but how many of you guys have lost loved ones in the past year? Twice removed? 3 times removed? Immediate family? It's been a year. It's been a year. And I think with that gratitude, he issues this idea from Nassim Taleb, talks about it in this book called Anti-Fragile. He talks about this general idea of that difficulty awakens genius. And that idea of going through difficulty awakens genius at a different level. So that kind of leads me into my first story. third, sorry. Jenna and I, 6 years ago, so this is, Eli just turned 6. Y'all saw him running around yesterday in a yellow sweatshirt. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Jenna woke me up. I won't quote you directly, but she basically was like, I don't think I'm doing well. And Eli wasn't due for like 2 months at that point. And sure enough, her water had broke. And so we got up. I don't even think we had go bags at that point, did we? Yeah, no go bags, no nothing. We were hosting guests that night who received a text message the next morning that said, hey, Jenna's in the hospital, in labor. Sorry, help yourself to the fridge. But we drove into the hospital last minute. I think I grabbed a pair of underwear at best, and we went in, and sure enough, Eli came along 3 days later after we held him off as long as possible. I was running Climb marketing with a good co-founder of mine and friend, and driving to the hospital, the only thing I could think about was number 1, that we weren't ready, and number 2, that I wasn't ready, and number 3, that my business wasn't ready. And that was a really, really scary feeling. There's the Mike Tyson quote, correct me if I'm wrong, that everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Is that Tyson? And so I got punched in the face. And so we drove to the hospital and spent 6 weeks there with Eli in the hospital. And we had 5 or 6 clients at the time. 2 or 3 of them were in precarious positions, and I thought, man, I think either A, I'm going to lose our kid, or B, I'm going to lose my business, and this time in the hospital. I remember feeling and thinking that at the time. And there wasn't a single nurse that stopped and told us that our kid was going to be okay. In hindsight, I know why, because if they tell you that your kid's going to be okay and then they're not okay, that doesn't go well for the hospital. But lo and behold, Eli was a super healthy preemie by preemie standards. And so 6 weeks of emails and phone calls and all the things from the hospital, and Jenna being patient through that, we came out, we lost 1 client. And my business had its first report card for its entire 4-year history, or 3-year history at that point in time. And we failed. We got a B-. Well, that's not failing. We came close to it. B-, let's go on. And I thought, well, that didn't feel great. And the first person in the first conference that I went to after that talked about this framework of this idea of finding, winning, and keeping. And so if you guys have been in any sales capacities, typically it's talked about in hunter-farmers. Have you ever heard that dynamic, hunter-farmers? So you've got hunters that go hunt the accounts, and then you got farmers that take care of the accounts and things like that. Well, for a long time, quite honestly, I tried to be full-on hunter, and my business partner was farmer. But the challenge with that analogy is hunting is actually really multifaceted. Finding a new client and winning a new client are 2 distinctively different disciplines. And so I separated those out within the business, and we got into this idea of finding, then winning, and then keeping. And what I learned about myself is that I was halfway decent, if not great, at this category here. I was a good closer. I can get in a room with someone, and typically that's where I shine. But I needed to find people around me that could do finding and keeping. And so we found people that could do those things as best we could. And sure enough, 1.5 years later, we were able to sell that agency because we actually operationalized it. So not rocket science, and so you have to learn it the hard way, which is kind of how I learned things. But take that one to heart. Even to this day, I think about the idea of hiring figureheads in those categories. Alex can do all 3. It's fair to say I think I can do C- level of 3 of those things, maybe A+ here. But it's no shocker that Alex and I are co-founders because he's really dang good at this one, the keeping. And so that's why we worked well together. So in your own businesses, if you read E-Myth or anything like that, this is, I think it's simplified and distilled version of that type of concept and works really well in the services space. Your finders should be good bird dogs. That's a little bit of a Texan term. But a bird dog is someone that hunts someone down, and birds in this context, and then points to where they are. And then their role is to diagnose. Their role is not to to correct or to recommend or to fix, but it's just to diagnose. If you walk into any clinician, what are the first three things they ask, no matter what you're in for? Typically it's going to be your weight, your blood pressure, maybe your resting heart rate. You get the idea. There's a certain amount of stats. That's the role of a good finder, is to take those stats and then hand it off to someone to go, okay, cool. They're exhibiting symptoms of strep, etc. Winners are good listeners. That's probably not a shocker to you guys. You're smart. But they're also, in my opinion, are good performers. A really, really good winner actually has to perform on the fly and actually create solutions on the fly in a sales conversation. And the least successful winners that I've worked with traditionally wait to perform and to do that until 2 or 3 weeks into the conversation, and they don't do that in the first conversation because they think, oh, well, they haven't paid for it yet. The best performers give without expectations in that conversation, and they show that solution immediately. Keepers, if I had 3 words, actually 2 words for Alex Herndon, it'd be that he's right a lot. A good keeper is diplomatically right a lot, and he actually embodies all 3 of those. Sometimes I get to handle some of the diplomacy on that end in a good way. But Alex is 100% right a lot, and so that's how it works. So Alex is actually the most diplomatic person. I just like to be bad cop sometimes in some of our business dealings, if you will. So it's not a jab at Alex. So that was the first framework. So we got through our time with Eli in the hospital. We got through that period of time and finally started to breathe a little bit. And about 1.5 years or so after that, I was approached by 2 or 3 folks at the same time that for whatever reason wanted to buy Climb. And that was a weird thing in the services space. I'd read a book called Built to Sell by, you're nodding, to put you on the spot, John Warlow?
Don't know.
John something. It's a good book, no matter. So I kind of was building the thing to sell it, but I didn't know really what that would look like. And sure enough, we had 3 or 4 suitors come along. I was good buddies with Achilles at the time. We had met probably 2 or 3 years prior to that. 2015. Yeah. And you know, one of the suitors was local in Boulder. It was a full service agency, but they didn't know how to do advertising and marketing, so they're full service creative. It's probably a better way to put that. And by a nature of circumstances, which I'm happy to chat with you guys at length at any point in time if you ever want to sell anything, I learned a lot through that process, and some of it good, some of it bad, but ultimately sold, and worked for a company called Human at that point. And Human's full service agency still have really, really great things to say about their creative services for sure. But it became apparent to me that we were selling, within that full service space, we were trying to sell a kitchen sink, if that makes sense. And quite candidly, in this circumstance, I'll share with you, I ended up kind of being the garbage disposal in that scenario a little bit. So I'd have to process what was going on with the kitchen sink and then make sure that something good came out of that. So that's probably where that metaphor breaks down. But what we ended up doing is ultimately do what I say would basically be kind of building these like half-built ways to success for our clients. So we'd be like, hey, you need this website and this thing, and you also need this, and you express interest in this. We can do it all, but we really rarely tied an entire bridge from one point to their success because we weren't tied to their success. We weren't tied to their ultimate goals. We were diagnosing and selling the things, but we really kind of cared about that pot of gold for them, but we didn't hold close to that, stewarding that thing and that vision for our clients. Again, not a direct reflection of those guys. That was just the model. If you need a video done, great place to get it done and those types of things, but it wasn't tied to their success. And that really didn't sit well with me from a stewardship standpoint. I really thought, like, why would we sell someone a very expensive something when we could save that money to spend on ads to amplify their business and actually grow it? And then that flywheel starts to become a sustaining thing. And I was reminded of the last time that I completed, that I found the pot of gold at the end of my rainbow, was back in 2004. So I'd been on a personal level I'm talking about, had been nearly at that point, give or take 8 to 10 years, something like that, and you're looking at her. So I remember getting off the bus at A&M, and I saw, if y'all haven't noticed Jenna's dimples, she's got the best dimples in the entire world. And by God's grace, like, our daughter inherited them. So she also got my eyebrows, Emmy did, so that's going to be a little bit of a thing. But it's going to work itself out. But I saw Jenna getting off the bus at A&M at Fish Camp, and I said, man, I've got to get to know that girl. And so I came at it with a marketing headline. I started with a little bit of broader, hey, would any of you guys like to dance with me? I was sitting with 5 or 6 girls. She was kind of sitting in a group of those. So I was like, hey, just, blanket statement. She said no. She was like, I bet you this girl Katie would come out and dance with you. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I don't get rejected too much, sales guy. And I think it was just the wrong copy. And so I tried, hey, do you know how to two-step for my next one? And she didn't know how to two-step. So, or you didn't know. You legitimately didn't know. So we went out and two-stepped, and then the rest is history. Dated 3 or 4 years, and then got married at the end of our time at A&M. And Jenna can attest to it. So if any of you guys are familiar with Enneagram, I'm a 7, which means I'm enthusiastic about a lot of things. And until I find the thing I'm like superbly enthusiastic about, sometimes it can be like herding cats to get me to congeal and just like focus on the thing. And I went from aspirations to be student body president and yell leader and, captain of the chess club and all the things that you could possibly do in a college environment. I was like, oh, I just want to do it all. To now I had my mission and my vision, and the next 4 years I worked my butt off, 3 jobs to make it a reality and to find that focus. So the reason I tell that story is that until you complete this bridge or you have a goal that's worth actually pursuing, your life could potentially look a lot like this, and or your business could look a lot like this, where you have 3 or 4 different half-built bridges and you haven't fully completed that vision. And part of resilience, I think, ultimately is about when you get knocked down, if you don't have a vision strong enough for what should be there when you get back up, it's going to be harder to get back up. Is that fair? And so sometimes, at least in my life, that's been shown again and again until I have that vision of the fast forward button to what this looks like when I get back up and when we get after it and we go and do the things. It's impossible for me to find the motivation to get up. Yeah, I can check the boxes and I can get up and I can keep going through that process, but it's not often that I get up and I'm fully charged and ready to go. And I think that's a key marker of resilience, is being able to do those types of things. And so what I was missing in this context and in this chapter at this full service agency, it was a connected bridge and the opportunity to sell a connected bridge and to actually reinforce that bridge and really create success for clients and do that with that level of focus and detail. And so that was a tough space to be. And in the middle of that space, our second most significant difficulty in the last 6 years came along. So Jenna and I were, I guess Eli was about 3. Yeah, about 3. And we actually came out here. We came out to Telluride on our pre-baby moon number 2 idea, because we just found out Jenna was pregnant. And we came out here. Were you pregnant at the time? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we came out here. We walked this hill. We enjoyed time together and just had a great time. And this is the first time we'd been out to Telluride. And we came back from that, full cups, ready to go. And we went in for Jenna's 20-week appointment and found at that point in time that Emmy was going to be born with a pretty significant spinal condition called spina bifida. And essentially the way spina bifida does, it actually interrupts the nerves in your spine and as your spine's growing, and essentially gives you like what would be equivalent of a spinal trauma. Say if you like broke your back, say skiing or something like that. So in the context of Emmy, she's L5S1, which on paper means that she can't walk, that she would be born with significant amount of head trauma and this thing called hydrocephalus, which is just a buildup of spinal fluid in your brain. And they asked us at that 20-week appointment, they said, hey, do you guys want to abort? Like, do you guys want to keep this pregnancy? And I said, and we're like, heck yeah, let's go. Her name's Emmy. She's going to be amazing. Let's go. And so from then on, the doctors called her Emmy. And we went through that period of time of just knowing all that we could know, but not knowing everything. And being lost in that level of ambiguity. And I don't think as business owners, you guys get it. You're constantly in a state of ambiguity, but I don't think I've ever been in that sizable state of ambiguity, like at that level of just not knowing, and then much less not being able to do anything about it, which as a business owner is a hard thing, for sure. And so we braced ourselves. We actually practically went and got counseling, which I think was a good thing for us to do, and just like made sure that our foundation was as superbly strong as it could have been. And sure enough, give or take 16 weeks later, we got back from a date, and fortunately Jenna's folks were in because we were on a date, and Jenna's water broke once again, like 4 or 5 weeks early. 5. And we'd been in the doctor's office that day, and I looked at the OB and I said, hey, with everything we got going on, if this kid comes today, I remember saying it, for whatever reason, let's just go through the if-then statements. Like, do I go to Boulder, which is 20 minutes away, or do we go to Children's, which is 45 minutes away? And she said, if you go to Boulder, which might be the appropriate medical decision, your kid's going to be on a helicopter within 20 minutes, and your wife's going to be stuck in Boulder, separate from Emmy Girl. And so it was like December 27th. It was about 33 degrees out, and about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and we got in my truck and we booked it. If you guys aren't familiar with Denver, but fortunately there's a toll road. I think I went 115 all the way around that thing, and we got there. And if we hadn't gotten there, it could have been a different reality, I think, for Emmy. She was not in a circumstance to be born in a normal way. Since she had a 6 centimeter lesion on her back that is not conducive to regular childbirth. So it was going to be a C-section anyway. We sliced it, and so got there. And Emmy was in our arms as close as she could be to our arms within 2 hours, hour and a half. And therein lies difficulty number 2, right? Now we've got yet another kid. We're in the hospital. We've got yet another business. I'm in the hospital. And I go, what did I learn last time? How do I apply it to this time? If Eli was the forget the literary term, prologue, is that right? It's my poetry major. Prologue? Yeah. Then essentially Emmy was the main act. And so she had surgery, and you guys, at some point, I think she came down at like 10 o'clock last night, wanted to see all you guys. If you were there around 10, she was wanting to hang out. But she's walking, she's running, she did ski lessons this past year. And we're quite honestly living with a miracle right now, every day of the week. And if those things weren't true, if she didn't walk or ski or run, man, I'd love her just the same. I really would. Just because those things are true does not change my love for her. And this idea of what is that pot of gold on the other side of the half-built bridge became something that I needed to change and to aspire to change and create and build business around and my life around. That just ultimately the formula that I was living, there was a variable in it that just had changed dramatically, right? And so Emmy's care plan is not an easy one. Jenna bears a lot of the brunt of that. It's 3 to 5 therapies a week right now, and if I'm not home by 5, then things happen. And so I had to create constraints. And Megan and I were talking about this last night, this idea of constraints and the power of it and business. Caterpillar back in 2007 did a exercise and said, hey, what happens if 25% of our business went away globally tomorrow? What would we do? And they did an entire pressure test on the business and had answers department-wide all the way across. Well, what happened in 2008? We all know, right? Caterpillar had its first major recession of a decade or two of strong growth, and they were ready. And so constraints create readiness, either proactive or reactively. In our scenario, reactively. We knew it was going to be hard. We didn't know how hard it was going to be until we got there. And it was hard. Those first 6 months and beyond were hard. And so ultimately I needed to start saying no a lot more in business than I was saying yes. And that was good. But my purpose had changed. And that kind of brings us to our third framework. We'll do a bonus round if we have time, but I'm sure you guys are getting a little uncomfortable, so sorry. You guys doing all right? In the somewhere okay range? So this is a bit of a Venn diagram a good buddy and mentor of mine taught me back in 2003. But it's this general idea of in business and in life, you need to have these three things present, right? So you've got your purpose, you've got something that you're ideally proficient at, and you've got something that you profit from, either as a business or as a person, ideally as both, right? As a person, if you have, say, purpose and proficiency present, but you don't have this thing called profit, congrats, you built a volunteer organization. You're in the nonprofit business, and that's okay. It's a good way to make a living, for sure, but it's just a different model, right? If you have purpose and profit, but you're not proficient at what you're doing, congrats, you're hustling. Like, you are just hustling. If you're profitable and you're proficient at something, but you don't have a purpose in that's guiding you in a direction that feels intrinsically right to you, you've got work. That's called a job, right? And so in an ideal scenario, all three of these things are present. If they're not, over time, if you're just volunteering, that causes debt. Fair. If you have purpose and profit and you're hustling, you're going to end up dead tired, for sure. Anyone been there? Yeah, we don't have to raise our hands. And then if you're proficient at something and profitable and you're working, over time, that looks like depression. Like, ultimately, you're going to live a life that doesn't have a ton of purpose thrown into it. And purpose doesn't have to be a mission statement that you fully believe in. It doesn't have to be something that's like absolutely perfect, 10 out of 10, every word you believe in with the organization that you're in or building. It can just be as simple as the story of like a janitor at NASA. JFK was doing a tour of NASA, and this JFK came up to this janitor and said, "Hey, tell me what you do here." And he goes, "Well, I'm gonna help put a guy on the moon by the end of the decade, like you said, sir." Well, he's scrubbing toilets. Let's just be honest. But he was mission driven, and he knew that he was adding to that mission. And so that's a mindset thing, but it also ideally is an organization-wide thing, right? That all three of those things are present, right? And if you're in an organization where you can't make that happen, then you got to find that level of purpose within yourself to go, yeah, I might be scrubbing a toilet today, but I'm putting a guy on the moon. And you can find that. It's a little bit more challenging, for sure. There's an adage of you're either building someone else's dream or you're building your own dream. I think there's a third category, which is you're building a dream that you believe in for someone for a collective thing that you believe in, right? Which is why probably Elon has a pretty decent retention rate, because I think a lot of people working at Tesla believe in what he's up to. So that's the third and final framework. There's a grab bag one in there that we could get into for sure. But the important thing here is, as it relates to business, I hope that you guys can see how those frameworks transition over to business. And so, to recap, if you have to be the guy in the room at all times, or girl, for your position, that's not called an operationally steady business. That's called a job that you've created for yourself. And believe me, I'm saying that with three fingers pointed back at me. there's still parts of our business for sure that only operate when I'm in the room or when Alex is in the room. The second is if you lose track of the pot of gold or whatever is represented as that pot of gold and that goal and that mission, things can get really, really dicey. You can start getting unfocused as an organization or as a person. And the third is that purpose element. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. What's interesting is in this book by Nassim Taleb, he talks about this idea of a graduated version of resilience being called anti-fragile. And it's an interesting concept. He takes the idea of the Greek mythology of this idea of this hydra that, I don't know if you guys are Greek mythology nerds, but I think it's the one that you can cut off its head and it grows back another head. Is it hydra or hydro?
Cut off one, it grows two.
Oh, it grows two, right? And so if you push into it with that stress, it actually comes back better, stronger, faster. And that's an interesting concept. But to me, if I was sitting over coffee with Nassim right now, I'd be like, well, is that the goal? Is it for an individual, for you to come back stronger? Is it the goal for the collective to come back stronger? And I operate more of the realm of the collective. Like ideally as an organization is pushed on through a pandemic or whatever it may be, that the collective would grow back stronger. And I'm sure he would say, yeah, you're right, that metaphor probably breaks down a little bit. But I would say that there's probably a third element to that: go fast, go alone, go far, go together. And I would say if you go too wide, you grow apart. And we happen to be sitting in this perfect metaphor. I'm not a flora and fauna expert, but these are not aspens, if I understand it right. The ones with the yellow leaves, by nature of us being here in the fall, happen to be aspens. And they also happen to be the biggest organism in the world. Bigger than like the blue whale, which is pretty big. Because, does anyone know why they're the biggest single organism in the world? Connected root structure. All of their roots are connected. Now, you see here, some dudes came along in the 70s and clear cut a ski run here, which is great. It's a lot of fun, but they grew too far apart. Like those aspens don't connect likely over to these aspens over here. So they grew too far apart. So for me, this weekend is about being together, right? Like a lot of you guys I've known for upwards of 3 to 5, 6, 7 years. And in a period of time where we couldn't connect physically and be with each other in person, you lose that connectivity and you lose that strength of that network. And so I hope that you guys would take advantage of this network, these people in this hillside, and grow together and go far. Because I think that's all within our taking, and that's all within our reach, and that's, I think, it's called the fourth and final element of resilience, is not operating in isolation. That's all I got. Cool. I'm gonna have Jenna come down and brag on her. I was already bragging on her a lot, real quick. I don't get to brag on her publicly too much. So, and then I'm happy to field any questions about that journey, but I think, not to put Jenna on the spot, I think you guys should ask her some questions about that journey, because without her, I don't think we could be standing on the side of a hill and Telluride right now, for sure. So, for those of you guys, there's a Tim Allen quote that says, "Behind every quote successful man, there's a woman rolling her eyes," and I the counterpoint to that is I do think that Jenna believes in us and me and the vision of what Alex and I are up to. So I don't feel her rolling her eyes, but I know that she probably wants to here and there. So thank you for the insurmountable amount of work that you do to keep this machine running, for sure. So and if Jenna, we all wouldn't be here without Jenna providing space and time to do something like this for all, collectively for us. So thank you guys, and if y'all give Jenna a hand, she deserves more than that. Any questions about our journey or the general idea of resilience?
Do you know
We do. Yes. We did it in the kitchen a few weeks ago.
So it's fair to say you rejected them because you asked 6 people at once?
That probably was it.
It was a targeting issue.
That's the one.
You went too far.
Yeah.
No, for sure. I'll ask you a question. So I drink coffee. Jenna does not. I don't know how you don't. Like, how do you get out of bed in the morning with that?
I have a purpose. I have to help a little girl do all the things that she needs to do. I have a son. I have you. The grace of God. It's not always easy, but just the mindset, like we've been talking about, and being grateful for the things that have been in your life, and even the things that are hard sometimes are the things that you can be grateful for too, because you don't get to embrace life the way others do. So you learn how to celebrate the very smallest things.
Yeah, it's interesting in the context of having a kiddo with a different level of needs and different level of capabilities. Progress for us is often iterative, not exponential. And I think in business, there's often, we want these exponential gains, and I think that's appropriate. But if you don't learn how to celebrate the iterative wins of, in the context of a kiddo with special needs, like Emmy's feet coming out of a serial casting thing that we did this past summer in Florida, grew from a size 3 to a size
5.
5.
Yeah.
That might not get you guys excited, but that's a really big deal. It's a small iteration in the grander context of everything else that she's got going on, but it was a significant leap forward, and so learning to celebrate those things.
Well, and it builds off of each other, because if you're just thinking of a little girl, if her feet are bigger, that allows her to be able to have more pressure on her feet instead of her heels. And it's like, if you look in life, if you grow a little bit, you're able to continue to grow even more and become stronger and better, and those little things actually build up to be much greater.
Any other questions?
Oftentimes in relationships, or at least what I found, is that your significant other, you guys will sometimes get in ruts at different times. So it's like you feel like you can support the other person while they're going through a tougher time. In scenarios where both of you are going through a really tough time, how do you manage that?
I fully resonate with what you said, because prior to Emmy, somehow, you're 100% right, it worked out in such a way that either I was like, I'm going through stressful stuff at work, and she's in a good spot, or vice versa, and there was always somehow it just always magically worked itself, where one was strong while the other was weak, and vice versa.
It doesn't happen like that anymore. Unfortunately, I feel like we start bickering, but then finally it's like we can't continue bickering. We've got to come together, work together, and communicate.
Yeah.
And I think we have to get all our feelings and emotions out to be able to kind of lay it all out, and to be able to communicate and figure out more of the factual things and the logistics of things, and then also talk about emotions and what we're feeling and how to get through it.
Yeah. Usually, I like that you started with bickering, because that's real. Usually it looks like this. Like, it's 9:30, maybe 9:45. We finally got the kids
At night.
and then we finally got the kids wrangled. Our evening routine's a little bit different just because of Emmy's stuff. And I'm like unloading the dishwasher, loading the dishwasher, and something small. Like, either A, I'll put a Tupperware in the wrong spot or something like that, which happens. And all of a sudden we're having a moment, right? And and it's not just, it can be, or vice versa, it's something small, right? And it's always something small, and then finally we'll get through that small moment, and we're like, we're not really talking about the Tupperware, are we?
The real stuff comes out.
Yeah. We're like, how are you doing? How are you doing? Now we'll sit down at the kitchen table, and like an hour and a half later, we've done everything from book upcoming flights to like do logistics of who's on first that week to checking in with each other as best we can. And so I'd love to say we figured out how to do that proactively. Josh, I don't have a proactive
We're
answer for you.
learning.
Yeah.
It's typically reactive. It's typically like we stumble across it and we're like, oh, we've been SEAL Team 6 for like 2 weeks, just who's on first and and we've had 0 time off the front lines. And now we've come into a scenario where we've really realized we need at least that hour to like really check in.
So I think the solution would be being able to have time to communicate with one another before it gets hard or bad. But I feel like in our season right now, we don't have that time, so it all comes out afterwards. But
There will be a
Perfect.
season. Yeah, I think there will be a season where it won't be, the kids won't be as hard at night and stuff like that. So
I think you pointed out a good point though of asking if we're really not talking about the Tupperware, right?
Yeah.
So many people don't ask that question. So many people don't go deeper. They get
it's always good to do life with others around you, whether partners or friends. You have to have that community to be able to get through everything. We all have our stuff. We all
Yeah.
have our difficulties.
yeah, that is something to say. I know I told some pretty like we have some relatively extreme circumstances in our lives with both of our kids really, like at the end of the day. And what's interesting is I've gotten to know any other entrepreneur that is internet famous and have gotten to a level of talking to them. They all have their stuff. And we all have our stuff. And some of it looks like having a kiddo with special needs for us, and some of it looks like something different that probably is not something I would share past that conversation with that person. But what I can tell you is that everyone has their stuff. And it's not always on you to overshare and share all your stuff, but like if you operate with that idea of like, oh man, that guy's Instagram famous and their life looks perfect, I got news for you. We all know this. It's not. But if you don't remind yourself of that every night at 10 o'clock when you're winding down and looking at Instagram or whatever, and you go to bed with this mindset of like, man, why do they have it all together? Like, how did they get to, like, how did they take their 2-year-old to freaking Barbados or whatever? And if whatever that conversation looks like with yourself, number one, they have their stuff, and number two, I'll bet you $100 that kid broke down on that plane just like any other 2-year-old would break down on a plane to Barbados, right? So everyone has their stuff. It's all present, but the key thing is how you handle your stuff, I think, and what the goals that you collectively are focused on. Probably some other things. Oh, and bring lots of snacks if you're on a plane with a kid.
And you become more resilient.
and melatonin.
I think that's about it, except, yeah, if anyone else has any questions except for how to get feeling back in your right leg? You guys all right? Cool.
The one thing I'd credit you both, like you're both very vulnerable, and I appreciate you sharing the story because I don't think people hear enough of that. Like everyone hides the darkness and just wants that Instagram thing. Did you always like reach out to people and like share that? It seems what has made it successful is you didn't do it in isolation. Like you just mentioned, you surrounded yourself with people. Were there any days where you wanted to deal with it on your own, or how did you keep that support group around?
I feel like when both of us tried to keep it internally and not even share between us, it made it really hard. And those Tupperwares got very, we got very particular about the Tupperware.
Lids.
But I think I've always been one to not hide behind just my exterior, and I can't because I don't feel like I'm real. And if I feel like the whole entire purpose of being alive is not to just be on my own, and I want Amelia and her story to be known, not to be like look at all she can do, but also to tell people that like just having a disability doesn't mean that it keeps you from being able to not be able to have a successful life. And I think if I'm not vulnerable, then her story can't be shared. And I want to inspire people to know that you can do hard things and still be able to do a lot of incredible things too.
I love how you turned it into a hero story.
Well, and I think that story's about you because you do hard things and you're pretty dang incredible.
Well, it needs to be done, kind of thing. So
I would say, so it's interesting around that idea of like that support network. And so I think rewinding back to Eli's journey in that first nearly 2 or 3 months, there's the 6 weeks that we were in the hospital, and we had an amazing network, but it's been said that the hardest 3 things to say are Worcestershire sauce, I love you, I'm sorry, and the 4th thing would be I need help. And that one I suck at. I'm really not great at the 4th one. I need help. And so by forcing to be in a situation where we actually needed to ask for help, it forced that function. And so either A, you have a circumstance that forces you to literally get so busy that you have no choice but to delegate, or die, or just not get sleep. And so the hardest part, to be honest, is on occasion when you do delegate or when you do reach out, and either A, things don't land, or B, that network kind of falls apart, or C, they don't fully understand, and that can get a little bit wearying for whatever reason. So I think being more specific, learning how to be more specific in the way I need help or we need help is always something we're still working on. But learning how to at least ask for help to begin with is something that, like, you can have community all around you and forget to ask and not express those needs, and you can be as lonely as can be. And what I've found is by actually asking people for help is they want to be a part of the journey in some way, shape, or form, and actually are typically honored in some way, shape, or form to actually be a part of that and to actually help. And I think about when I have the opportunity. Oh, last tangent, but important. On this note, we lost our ability to help in the middle of this journey. We lost our physical capability
For
as a
this
couple
time.
to help for a period of time, if not to some extent till through today. And when you lose your ability to help, you actually learn how important that is to how you operate, because that is such a gift to actually have the bandwidth to help someone. And so if you're not open with A, that you need help, or B, that you have the that you have the opportunity to help, and those 2 things never come together, you're actually losing a big part of life in this idea of being that aspen tree and connected to other people.
I'll share one thing if I can from my own journey. I run a nonprofit with an NFL player and have done some pretty cool stuff together. We worked with a lot of kids with cancer. That's our main focus. And Bo and I actually had a pretty good conversation when I know you were pregnant with Emmy, and just kind of what that looked like and resources and all of that stuff. But a family who is we kind of adopted groups. We called them our game day heroes as kids and their families, and they stayed with us. It was kind of like Make-A-Wish, but we never it was the one event. We just did cool stuff with them. My house caught on fire. It was Friday before Father's Day, and this family came out on Father's Day because I was moving all of my stuff out on Sunday, and literally wouldn't let me touch anything. They would pick up stuff, and they were storage or trash. They was just asking me, and literally handled everything. It was a moment of literally all of my stuff is just burned. And after the end of the day, Mom stopped, and she is in tears, and she was like, I never thought that I'd even have the chance to repay you for what you did for my family and the way you helped me. And she was like, I am so grateful that you allowed us to help you. And it was a moment that I think redefined that space, because I was struggled with asking for help, but I realized at that moment how selfish I had been, helping all of the people I had helped and never letting them repay me, and feeling almost in a sense she didn't say this, but does someone actually feel in debt to you that you'd never let them repay that help? And that is such a duality of humankind, of to be helper and help at the same time. And it's just huge impact moment for me, just having someone break down thanking me for being able to help me, and I'm sitting there in such gratitude, because I don't know how I would have done that actually. So
Yeah, there's a gift in giving too.
yeah.
Fraternity truck kiddos that too. And even with all the kids here, it was really neat to see last night when we had to care for Amelia last night. All of the kids were in the room. They were all together. And she's little, so it's not a big deal. But it's one of those where when you make something not normal, it stays not normal. But when you let people be a part of it, it becomes a new normal and people don't think it's weird or awkward, and you do it together. And that's what I think it's all about.
Well, even in a business context, if you ostracize someone for admitting that they failed, no one's ever going to admit that they failed again in that conference room. It's just not going to happen. Ford, back in 2008, they installed a new CEO probably about year and a half into that whole thing. And he went in and they were doing a status update at the big first conference, like meeting with all the department heads, and all the statuses were green. Everyone reports that everything's great, production line's great. Sir, yes, sir. And CEO goes, hey guys, we're down 20%. So I understand that everything operationally is great, but like, is there a chance that something's yellow or red? And the first guy, raised his hand, and let's call him Bob. And John, let's call that CEO John, called on Bob and said, Bob, tell me what's going on. And Bob was like, yeah, we got this supply chain issue. It's complicated. I've never seen one like it before. And everyone thought like Bob was going to get fired. Like they didn't think Bob was coming back to the conference room table the next day. The next day, not only did they solve that problem collaboratively at that table, but Bob was sitting to the right hand of the CEO. And he was there, and all of a sudden all the tasks went to yellow and red because they learned that they could be vulnerable in that space. And so like without that step of normalizing failure or uncomfortable moments in this context, you actually lose the gift to actually be able to become greater. All right, that's it. I just want to hug you. Thanks, guys. So logistics-wise, my only ask is that we get a picture while we're up here. So we'll probably line up right on this edge of the bench road right here, and then probably shoot down that hill. Other than that, really